the start of January, I bought a program that was developed by Jordan B. Peterson, Daniel Higgins, and Robert Phil. And so I tried it out because I needed something to do with myself. And after having finished the entire thing, I must say it was quite rewarding to complete. The exercises that were included were pretty good. I got to learn more about myself, probably in ways that I didn't know consciously. The program is sectioned into 4 parts: present authoring, faults, future authoring, present authoring, virtues, and past authoring. So I'm going to go over them in this order: past authoring, present authoring, faults, present authoring, virtues, and future authoring. In this video, I will briefly talk about each section, talk a little about myself as I walk through the parts. This video might get a little long, so if that does happen, I hope you enjoy your stay and that you maybe even learn something. Perhaps you will consider buying the program for yourself. If I can convince you to do that, that would be a decent piece of feedback to let me know that I'm good at explaining an experience that I had with the product. Pay attention and watch this video full screen, because if you don't, then that tells me, and should also tell you, that perhaps your attention span is not that great. And that's not good. So yeah, let's get into it. Past authoring. In this section, you are asked to enter a phase of deep contemplative thought, where you can visualize memories vividly and can carry out an active imagination that will help you remember past events that had a meaningful impact in your life as a whole. The authoring section is divided into epochs. These are periods in your life that contain several important memories that you carry over the course of your childhood and the span of your life in general. The epochs that I have written about are the following: high school, middle school, 6th grade, gamer group, life in Illinois, and dating life. High school. Each epoch is rich in experiences, and whether that is for the better or worse, you can be the judge of that. The first experience I wrote about in the high school epoch was the times that I would take the role of an English teacher to my classmates. Because I was kind of the only one with as much experience with the English language than anyone else, our teacher figured that it wouldn't hurt too much if I had my way for a few sessions, considering I could speak it well, write it well, and hey, maybe even teach it well, or at least that was the ideal. I wasn't too bad at it, but obviously because my classmates didn't necessarily want to pay attention all day, they would often zone out while I was in the middle of explaining something. The second experience was my time in another school I was attending at the time. We would often go outside and play soccer with the other groups of boys, and it was fun because it was a tight competitive scenario, so it's just hard to fake that kind of stuff. You will get to know your limits and strengths. Then I wrote about my time in SADI, which was in high school. My other school went by Guisar y Valencia. SADI was a school with special attention to challenge students with some kind of learning difficulty. You would often see kids with a lot of different neurological disorders. So I got a chance to learn how to communicate and cooperate with different kinds of people, and that is always useful to know how to do. And Wednesdays, we would get to do sports. That's when everyone got to try their best at something that was challenging and fun, which was why it was my favorite activity there. Moving on to the topic of having a crush on someone. I wouldn't get a crush that regularly, but I did like the idea of getting with multiple women when I was a young teenager. Now, I don't think in that way anymore, but I used to consider the concept. At some stage in my high school years, I would have the great idea of dropping out of high school. Now, obviously, because I'm a genius self-made millionaire by 18, I failed to do that. Should have known that I wasn't anywhere near ready to start from zero, and expect to succeed without the right amount of practice. But I was young, uneducated, and dumb. As a typical teenager happens to do so, I also happened to get into a romantic relationship with a girl for the first time in my life. In person, that is. The relationship was disastrous, and I'm glad it's over because we wouldn't get along well, for too long anyhow. Middle school. Now the first experience I would write about would be my experience as an awkward type of person and how I would go about navigating my social life. I have learned a lot about how to properly behave and interact in social contexts, but obviously there is still more work that needs to be done in order to refine my charisma and social appeal. The second experience talks about a situation I had with a girl that I was classmates with at that time. I was talking about how I was unknowingly a little rude to her when she was just trying to be nice with me and wanted to have a decent conversation or chat. I was too busy locking myself away from the world, and this memory would serve as a reflection of what not to do again. My third experience was about how my parents were divorcing at that time. As I'm writing this, I don't feel much guilt, shame, embarrassment, or sadness, because I have already let out my demons that had to be taken care of for me to be able to breathe safely in my own skin without as much anxiety anymore. What happened has happened, and I can live without hidden resentment within my system, or at least less than before this writing. The other experience I had throughout middle school was my time practicing Taekwondo. I had already practiced Taekwondo before coming to Mexico, but I would continue my path here in the school I was attending to. I enjoyed it and I got to yellow belt. Around the final year of middle school, I would be in 9th grade, where I got to have classes with a girl who I had known since 6th grade, as she was attending the school at that time as well. At the end, we never managed to get along and we parted ways soon after graduating. But before that happened, we had a brief window of time that was spent in Zoom meetings because COVID had set in, as it was 2019 and the pandemic was being propagated. It was awkward, and I had moments that were cringeworthy, as we like to call it now. 6th grade. Starting things off with this epoch, it is important to know that by the time I was in 6th grade, my family had recently moved in with my mom's parents, and so would begin this stage in my life where I am living in my grandma's house as we know it. I had arrived to Mexico when I was just 11 years old. All of my life experience until then had been entirely on the USA, so this was a major transition for me. I would become more like my parents in culture and tradition, and my personality would soon change drastically. I was also living with my grandfather, my mom's dad. At the current date of writing this, my grandfather is dead. But this didn't really affect me that much, but condolences would still be appreciated if they were sent my way. Thanks. Anyway, he was hard to work with. Mostly you live with, but work with also works. I had to find a friend who I could rely on because making friends at school was very difficult for me, as I wasn't cultured properly to feel comfortable enough interacting with my classmates in a natural way that wasn't stressful. I would come to know a guy called Angel, who would be my companionship for the majority of the remaining year. I haven't kept contact with him ever since, but he was a nice friend, and he also got me to play chess, the board game. Being away from my father was a tough journey to venture alone. Looking back, I really could have benefited from having his guidance and direction steer me in the correct path because I could have used it a lot. My young self was ignorant, scared, and lonely. Regardless of what might have happened to me, I pulled through it. And this was also the time I would meet a teacher that was nice enough to give me one of her acoustic guitars, which she personally didn't use anymore. She was a substitute teacher for some time, but she didn't last the whole school year, so that sucked. But it was nice to find someone I could relate to at that time. Since making friends in person was a troublesome learning process, I would also be utilizing a social media app called Amino. This app was themed on the idea of making friends online through the involvement of communities that were centered on a particular subject of interest. I would meet a lot of people here that had an impact on me and how I view myself, but I won't go into the contents of that just yet. Gamer group. I was in a group of friends when I was in high school, and they were the gamer pals that I would get in calls with when I was home and didn't have anything else better to do, because that's probably how you would get into such a kind of situation to begin with, if we're honest. I would meet a guy called Fernando, who I still keep in touch with today. He has a YouTube channel of his own, so I will put the link to that in the description of this video. Getting back to the point, we would befriend each other while playing a game called Left 4 Dead 2. It was probably our favorite game to play together, but the more important part is that at some later stage of this event, we would get with some friends of Oliver, who was Fernando's brother, resulting in a group of 5 guys that played games together, and it was as chaotic as you could imagine. The game we would most often play together was Counter-Strike Global Offensive, now called Counter-Strike 2. I haven't played that in forever, so what it's like now must be a lot more different to the game it used to be, at least graphics wise. Minecraft was also a game we would regularly play. We didn't cooperate very well in any game, but if we did try our best, we could manage to pull off some cool things every now and then. I was the enthusiastic guy who tried to get along with everyone and make sure we were all on the same page and have fun at the end of the day. I would eventually quit being a part of all this because it was interfering a lot with my studies and personal goals. So it has been a long time since I've hopped on the game with them. It was last in August of 2023, if I'm not mistaken. That's not even a year, so this wasn't too long ago. Metalhead Tony. More of a personal one for me, since I obviously can't go crazy with the details of what music I was finding enjoyable at that time, where I had become passionate for it the most. Not to mention it would be extremely boring to hear a guy ranting forever about something that is not too related to the main topic of the video anymore. But in short, heavy metal was a genre of music that would come to define my artistic interests for a large part when I was in Mexico. It would also play a large role in getting to know myself and what I would identify culturally with. This also brought my musical interest in the bass guitar as the instrument of choice for studying and improving on. Life in Illinois. Back in the good old days, we had the Times of Cicero. This was the city that I was living in back then, and was a peaceful, quiet part of town that I resided in. There's still times that I think about it because it really was a nice place. Sure, nothing worth touring over for, but in terms of living conditions, I found it to be enjoyable. But then again, a part of me may just be biased because it was the place that my childhood belongs to. The elementary school that I would be studying at was called the Wilson School. It was a nice place to be a kid growing up. Sure, maybe not the best teachers or staff there, but the building was usually clean, safe, and comfortable for a kid to grow up without major traumas, you know? Halloween deserves a mentioning of its own because of how inspirational it was to the vivid imagination that a child intuitively has. The holiday is, in my opinion, nowhere near as exciting here in my parts of Mexico as it was where I used to live. Being a kid was fun when you had Halloween. Christmas was also a wonder. It doesn't snow here where I live, but it did snow a lot in Illinois. Sometimes this was annoying because it really would get cold to the bone. Despite this, seeing the white snow cover the territories one would find themselves in was always fun to observe. Not to mention that this is when the family gets together and can sit back without much worrying about responsibilities. Not that kids have many responsibilities. Unfortunately, even when I was still a little boy, problems in the marriage between my parents would arise up. I don't blame my parents for getting into the issues they did because that's their issue and not mine. But it did affect my childish mind a lot. I can't say that this defines the rest of my fate here on this earth. So it is very important for me that I learn from their mistakes and that I don't repeat any undesirable traits or behaviors that I learned from their influence. My brother also had a lot of history with being in the hospital for several reasons. He would have to be in a bed with medical appliances around him. This would sadden me and my parents greatly. All I want to take away from this experience is that I'm grateful that my brother had the medical team that he got because he really had it bad at times. He's okay now, so thank God for that alone. Being in the USA, we would also spend time with my cousin Luis. He was like 20 years old or something now. So me and him are young adults at this phase. I haven't talked to him in a while, but I hope he's doing well as he was my favorite cousin growing up and is a memorable member of my family. Dating life. It shouldn't come to the surprise of anyone that I am a woman attracting magnet and always have been. Okay, no. But seriously, it goes back a while. One of the girls I would date online was called Kiana. She was a nice girl, but I would eventually have the great idea of ghosting her because I was partially embarrassed to be her boyfriend. Not because she was ugly or anything, but because the idea of being in an online relationship was strange to me. Which was ironic because there would be many more to come. Another girl I was not dating but would get to know was called Haley. She was also a sweet person, but because I wasn't physically attracted to her back, we didn't do anything in the end. It showed me what it was like to be in the shoes of someone who rejects rather than is the rejected one, which I was more familiar with the latter. One of the more memorable relationships for me was one I had with a girl called Melissa. I didn't really know what to expect at the start of our friendship, but at some stage, I would eventually like her. This came to fruition as a rather surprising discovery for her since she never felt anything for me. Shortly after I told her that, we would part ways for good this time, since I had momentarily blocked her when she upset me in one instance that we were talking. The funny thing is that the girlfriend I had in person would also happen to be called Melissa, but spelled with a double S. Being with her was a painful experience to break away from since I would reflect on my actions harshly, and I noticed that I did a lot of things that I think any reasonable woman would have come to conclude that I was not someone worth being around with. The second girl that I would be dating in real life was called Eva. We didn't last very long, as it also occurred with Melissa, but the difference with Eva was that I was the one who cut things short. I couldn't be dating anyone at that time since I was focusing on getting my crap together at school, and simply couldn't afford to be investing too much time for a person. A part of me did get with her just to not be single and be seen as a loser for it, but now I learned that it isn't too bad to be single for some time. The final girl I would write about was called Carly. She was in her mid-teens and I was in my late teens. We met through Roblox. We played some games together and I developed feelings as I got to know her better. I never proposed to her or anything like that, but I did have to cut her off, respectfully letting her know since I was just in the process of quitting Roblox for good and couldn't be hanging out with someone who would encourage the bad habit. Even if me and I never started anything together, she was still a nice friend to have. Still, I wouldn't get back in touch with her. Present authoring. Faults. Now we are going to move on to the faults section of the present authoring category. This is probably the more easily repeatable part of the program since you can take it more regularly in theory, considering that the present moment will change a lot more than the future and past ever could. The program asks you to select some faults that you can detect in yourself based on the big 5 personality traits, that being extroversion, neuroticism, openness to experience, conscientiousness, and agreeableness. After doing this, you're asked to select 6 of the faults that are the most prominent to you and that you believe should be improved the most. The faults that stuck out to me were that I could be more socially skilled and don't appear to learn from my mistakes as well as others do, have too little to say, feel drained by social interactions, have a social circle that is too small, and that I am quite critical of others. This is what you're going to be thinking about as you go through the program. There is a progress bar on the top right side of the screen that shows you the percentage of completion that you filled so far for each authoring section to keep you motivated. The reason I chose needing to be more socially skilled is a little bit vague, but in summary, there's been multiple moments in my life that could have gone a lot more smoothly if I had known how to handle them. Something that I will keep in mind is to put my focus on the person I'm talking with instead of on myself, as that helps the conversation flow more prosperously. I'm not sure exactly how fast someone is supposed to learn from their mistakes, but a part of me does feel that I may be slower in that department. I'm not sure if that relates to the person's IQ in some way, but I am confident that this is also something that could be changed with enough persistent efforts. A mindset change that I applied was to consider the immediate consequences to my actions, and not to think too far ahead of how they will affect me, since that won't really motivate to not repeat a mistake as much. Then there's having too little to say. The point is to have a conversation with someone and not concern oneself too much over the quality of the conversation. Just have it even if it is not that great. Because it isn't fun to be a shy person, and if it's that, I need to speak up even if I don't seemingly gain much out of it. Another one of my faults, as previously mentioned, is feeling drained by social interactions. The mindset change that I have used is to consider the replenishing of energy I will get after having socialized and not the opposite phenomena, to be depleted of energy. I need to appropriately address the importance of being connected to others. The semi-final fault that I'll be talking about is having a social circle that is too small. To be honest, and to not betray anyone, will serve my chances of getting my social circle to expand rather than shrink. The final fault is that I am quite critical of others. I'm going to have more mercy and tolerance for the people that I have a negative view on. To the degree that I judge others, I too shall be judged. Present authoring virtues. The second part of the present authoring section is to write about your virtues. It isn't necessarily the second part of the first, it just depends on what order you write. Anyway, much like you do in the faults part, you will also be choosing characteristics about yourself that you hold to be true based on the Big Five model for your personality traits. Every prominent trait that you choose will be analyzed further, and much like the faults part of the present authoring, you will also be elaborating on 6 traits that you chose to be the most important. Starting things off, I choose my first virtue to be the fact that I'm comfortable being alone. I wrote about how other students of my age would tend to need a lot of time with their friends or acquaintances, wherever they were, and I wouldn't need nearly as much company, I suppose. Something I learned from reflecting about this was that having people around you will not necessarily mean that you can't feel lonely, because it certainly, very certainly happens, and it's no joke. My second virtue is being philosophically inclined. Now, I am not one to naturally pull off Shakespearean lines of poetry, but I am more on the side of wanting to be able to have an intellectual side to me. I like things that make you think hard, especially the kinds of things that talk about what is right or wrong. Even if my ideas make me sound a bit crazy and a little off the context at hand, expressing things I find interesting is valuable to me despite the autistic resemblance it could leave as an impression. Not to mention that the mere act of being careful with your wording will subconsciously invite those around you to display their highest genius as well. My third virtue is not being so insistent on being the center of attention. It has helped me avoid problems that were none of my business. It's fine if you don't always get the stage and the spotlight. There will always be another opportunity later for you to command attention. My fourth virtue is being able to handle a lot of information. I have noticed from testing people online that I can go on for a while about a topic of interest for me. Not only that, when I explain something, I can use more technical language and extend my paragraphs if I must. I believe that reading books is like lifting weights, but for your intellect. My fifth virtue is that I don't always have to talk about myself. I can make fluid conversation for merely observing someone else and then asking them questions to extend the dialogue. This also prevents me from being seemingly narcissistic or not necessarily self-centered in communicational contexts. Direct your attention more towards a person's mind rather than your own disposition. The final virtue I wrote about was that I am good at paying attention to details. I told a story about having written a nice poem for a friend of mine whose birthday was in that same day. Sure, I had been writing that poem for some time before her birthday, but it ended up being quite good, and she received it very well. The words that I chose were careful and deliberate in purpose and intention. And so, my hypothesis of being a person who values things in not the same manner, but in a selective order of importance and value, make me a rational human being with capacity for doing good. Future authoring. This section of the program starts with asking you for one thing you could be doing better. Now, I'm not exactly sure if that is the first part you wrote about, but from looking at my summary report, that is the first thing on top of the paper. I didn't know exactly at that moment what that would be, but I would later notice that it is my ability to be a good friend that was lacking in me. because I am not one to be naturally gifted with making friends. This is already a great start for this part of the program because right away, you're asked to start with being truthful with yourself and really ask to your logical mind what it's likely you could be doing that will end up making things change for the better. Afterwards, you will be asked to write about things you want to learn about. Here you can talk about your interests, if that isn't something you already do with someone in real life, maybe because you're a particularly quirky individual who goes by they them pronouns and likes to talk about the wonders of Karl Marx's ideas. Considering my department for psychology, it will be my greatest interest to continue studying about this young science into further levels of research for my sake and that of others who I may educate alongside my own mind. Then, you are requested to talk about ways to improve your habits. In this part, you can write about what are some bad habits that you may be doing right now and that you feel like you could be guilty of. There will be some categories that the program will suggest that you write about to make the introspection easier to write down. The next part will involve arguing about your future social life. Who will you be talking to, and why will those kinds of people be in your life? Personally, I want to live by myself for some time before I get my own family, as I have already lived for my entire life by the presence of other family members. This would undoubtedly be highly odd at first, but over time I'm hoping to get used to it, because as things stand right now, it would be for the better anyway. Once you can think about how your social circle might look like, the program then asks you to think about what your leisure time will consist of. Feel free to talk about your recreational hobbies for this part, as this will give you a clearer idea about what your future has in store for you when it comes to having fun and how you artistically express the unique side that there is to you. The part that follows is interesting. You will be inquired about the way that your family life might be like in the future. Understanding what your familiar structure should be like will ease off the tension that comes from contemplating the nature of being who you are within your family, and it will help you identify the important factors that should be regarded when thinking about what a stable and harmonious family is like, so that you can get a greater chance of making that a continuous reality. I don't know about you, but I would want my family life to feel safe, much like my home should be. A secure environment with minimal to no concern over one's safety from disease, violence, or insufficient resources. Coming next is the way you visualize your career to look like. Take your time for this one, because it will be important if you want to have an academic or professional success later down the line. Finishing that segment, coming up will be the part where you get to write about your ideal future. You will be asked the following questions. Who do you want to be? What do you want to do? Where do you want to end up? Why do you want these things? How do you plan to achieve your goals? When will you put your plans into action? Once you finish writing about these questions, your next task will be to tell yourself a long lecture about how it is that you could potentially screw up your entire life. So what future would be best avoided? There's certainly a few things you could be doing that you know deep down are not good, but that you still do anyway because the immediate consequences are not so severely punishing. The last part of this exercise involves thinking about your goals. You will be asked questions about how you will carry them out and what there is that must be done or at least considered as you strive towards their completion. This will be the longest part, or parts, of the future authoring section. I'm not going to tell you everything that comes within the program for fear of possibly getting a copyright strike for it, but that is the general idea of what you will expect when you purchase a full program. Writing this down has made me realize that I have a lot to think over, not just through the process of writing down this video script, but also while I wrote the contents in each authoring section. It can be fun if what you want is answers, or at least hints of those answers. I must say that I definitely recommend that you go check it out for yourself. Having done this until the end has made me appreciate my ability to write thoroughly and with profound depth, as well as the effects that it has had on my mental capabilities. Find out more about what there is and about what should be all in one package, because that's definitely why I have gotten as a result of taking this therapeutic adventure. Remember to check out the description for links containing more information on what has been discussed throughout this video. Please consider joining my Discord server Inside Academy. It isn't very big right now, but it would mean a lot to me if you went over there and joined, because I want to make it a good place for discussing abstract topics like philosophy, ethics, religion, morals, values, concepts, books, and psychology, of course.